blade of wind, swishing the cold above our faces like a boy flicks a thin stick, just to hear the quick of it, the sharp whisper, so far away, so intimate, it hurts. Now from this same landscape, there comes a second poem, which I call Immortals. I need to go further. I need to stop trying to leave the body behind, its disappointments, skin more speckled than it used to be, lines more complicated. Descending, my knees trembled like a couple of shivering dogs. Easy now, there. I wanted to go on and on. I could see where the stone held out its cupped hands, where the sky, falling, had worn away each curve, all of it perfectly still. The great body of rock, beautiful. For once, it wasn't fleeting. Light traveled down stone flanks each day, broad hands, fingertips, then back up the other side of canyon walls, with their serious paint, their sorrow, their tapestries of stain. I wanted their cups and hollows, their rooms within rooms, mouths, nostrils, apertures of almost, whose silences seemed absolute. But everywhere we clambered over rubble, enormous shelves cracked away, dissolving clots of sand, trees yanked and twisted under. The night it rained, I finally understood not just disaster, but everything trickling down. The streaked awnings of rock, the glorious, the ancient decay. None of us stay. Leaving, I touched the last wall. I put my hand into its shallow mouth, a bowl of sand. It held its own disintegration. The sand was soft and cool. I ruffled it. I pressed my fingers down. I left that print behind, and then I climbed, my face dust-streaked. Oh, just this bundle of pieces still working together, a kind of blind devotion. I climbed out of the canyon into myself, into the cab of the pickup truck, the seat too big, my feet sticking out like a kid's, as the road stretched thin across the land. You could see the stone ribs break the surface, again and again, until black cows lifted out of nowhere, chewing, flicking their ears over new calves, like shadows fallen asleep in the bushes beneath them. There's no stopping. Here's my bag of raisins, my notebook, my pen, the enormous wheels climbing the culverts, the birds that seem to leap away, not fly. Here is the rope, the cup, the box of Band-Aids, my fortunes arrayed, the book of chance, the book, the chance, the last few notes I keep humming under this breath. Another landscape. And this one is not so far away. This poem is called Scribble. The road, out where the weeds were sprayed, went on and on, scrappy fields, scraped landscape we sometimes become without knowing how. It's hard to keep going far enough to get anywhere new with the sun setting and some whip of a snake rippling away through the stubble. Nothing to say, this is why. And then you come to the trees, huge maples from the last universe, and shadows sleeping among them, gliding down their trunks, and daylight's fist unclenching. And now the weeds ascendant. You wade through as if they were the great eyelashes of the end of June. Maybe this is going deeper into nowhere. Maybe this too is a mistake. But no, the bend in the river is there, the river itself with the sky sitting on its gleaming back. The two of them, sky and water, going off together, away. Constant departure only possible by somehow staying too. You sit on the rocks, as if that could add up to forever. Maybe you pick thorns from your socks. Maybe you lob rocks in hard etched arcs to the other side. Maybe you watch something rise to the surface and wriggle toward you until it dives under, disappears. And so every way is traversed, the ones with names, the ones without names. That night we took another path. We saw nobody, just the grasses blazing with light and the valley dark behind them, and I thought, the exact joy of a sea cliff. Nothing to do with water, just the wild nothingness of darkness, the wind shaking its mane. The trail plunged in and out of the trees then, their meditations, their moss, their dim quietude. And then more meadows. And I looked in case, and I saw a coyote leaping. Of course it was the color of hillside, dust and dry grass and shadow and earth. Of course it was leaping, late in the day, too far away to hear the grasses whisk with every descent. Maybe he was made of light. But I looked again and saw again, this time standing still, watching me, far enough to be a coyote's scribble in the grass. You see how little it takes to be real, to enter the story, to change the shape of a day. I was a scribble. We were all of us scribbles, walking into the light, each trailing our dangling line, staying, going, gone. I'm going to go to yet another landscape. I grew up on the coast, and I returned to the coast for visits. And actually just yesterday I got into a conversation with a surfer. And it's very satisfying to realize that even though I don't surf, I know the coastline well enough that I could have this really awesome conversation because I knew all the little spots he was talking about and where the wind blows and where it's really good to enter on this kind of day and that kind of day. It's kind of fun. This poem is called Wet Rocks. The tide sucked away as if someone were tipping us toward the horizon, except nothing spills. The sea simply changes its shape, the way breathing changes the shape of the body in making it live. We step around weedy rocks and pools, all these caves of wet, glistening, waiting to wake underwater again. But what about the soft mosaics of anemones, settled on once bare mansions of rocks, now half buried in tides of sand? Speckled mounds, I want to say eyes blinking, mouths waiting to open, living as if the sand will swirl and swirl away. Every season there are these multitudes swallowed. And at the end of the point where the rocks rise high, nothing grows, nothing stays. You feel the heavy green sea body swaying just beyond, and today men stand like cormorants, guillemots, pelicans, their backs to the pools, facing the sea, to cast, reel in, cast again, as if trying to draw a line to the horizon, the first essential stroke of a piece of calligraphy. They don't speak. One smokes. A drift of cloud blows behind him when he breathes. They could stand like this for hours. I want to say days passing, or years, so worn, so alike in their boots and squints and faded clothes, repeating themselves in lines of try again. When one feels a tug, the others pause. Broad fins like wings too small for flying, green hands flapping, waving. He lays the fish on the rock's hard belly and measures it, stiff fingers spread as if to soothe, to caress, as if he were placing himself inside that skin of scales and apologizing again for the hook he always feels beneath his own tongue. When the squall begins to drive from the west, the tide has already turned. The fishermen pack up for shore, rain tracing little meandering lines down soft flanks of sand. actually know when I started.
Okay. Nobody knows.
A little while.
A little while ago, okay. So, this poem's landscape is a few miles north of the last poem's landscape. And it's called Gift Horse. You come to a house made of bones. You come to a house made of feathers and hair. You come to a house made of teeth and nails in search of know not what from know not where. There was a horse on the beach that day, that mound heaped up and crumpled like an old sail blown in. The teeth gave it away. And the wind couldn't leave it alone, had to keep plucking the sand's wet cloth, had to carry off bits of horsehair in its invisible fists to show, see, as if I hadn't seen and tried to look away. The horse that was nothing but teeth and a skull arrived in the night. It became the length of the beach. From jetty to rock, I walked its body. I began to wear fur. I began to feel hairs on my skin, in my mouth. Tufts and clumps are everywhere. The line between beach and disaster grows slim. There had been a body rolling in the tide as if swimming in sleep, hooves drifting, tail swirling like seaweed. Now the wind picks up. Bits of dry hair, the damp horsehair, the sea-damp sand, everything becomes kin and strange. There was a house of bones, a house of hair, a house of teeth. If I put my hand in the horse's mouth and reach behind the sand, behind the tongue that isn't there, something jiggles, riddle, fishhook, thorn, key. It can be awfully unsettling to find a familiar landscape oddly transformed, but it happens all the time. There's landscape in this next poem, but it's also about a sort of layering of another kind, which I think the poem describes. Well, here's the title. Upon finding the old calendar matches the coming year. I should just say I do say probably more things than I need to. There was a game where all the floor was lava. You had to make your way across a room without ever touching down. Couch, chair, coffee table, cushion. But the sky descended and erased what came before. Daffodils filled the afterward rooms, white, then yellow, erased or altered. I found a calendar of the year before my father died. It exactly matches the year I'm about to enter. Oh, I feel the little hairs of me rise and urge, go back, go somewhere else. Not so long ago, I met a man who plays the tuba. The horn seemed bigger than he was. Vessel, silver blossom, receptacle, mouth. You have to be willing to take up more space than you fill. Like when I lived alone with the sky, and every night when the sea basket closed, I hung that greasy apron on its hook and stepped outside. The tuba guy made the sound of wind blowing through trees by breathing into the horn. He made the sound of a foghorn at night calling across that empty parking lot where the fog hung still and clean and the soul was vast, enormous, shining, and you could sit inside it. Like the summer that was the last of my father's life, though none of us knew it then, not even him. Not even when he came home and told us he'd stepped right out of his body, left it there on the road behind the dune where you can't see the ocean, but it's everywhere. The smell, the soft roar, the little cries of birds. He just kept jogging, light, easy, until he looked back where he'd been and saw his body in a heap on the ground. He went back, Which book explains this? He went back that time. He picked himself up. He brought himself home to tell us. There is a slide of time over time. The ground grows warm underfoot, not completely solid. Who do I think I am walking so close to see the wound where the earth has opened itself, where its body is breaking and remaking along, glowing to the edge of the sea? I walk along the shore in the dark to where the earth burns and drips pieces of molten self into the waves. Hello, goodbye, steam and roar and hiss and spray. The bright pieces toss and tumble, beautiful, deadly, dying, new. The ground is warmer now. Trees engulfed, burst into flame, and the sea a wild embrace. Well, this poem is called Landscape, so I guess I better read it. You could see where the horses had been, droppings heaped like cairns to guide us, and the tiny lines of pine needles, crisscross cracks of light on dark. Maybe these were auspicious signs, but even if the circles of trees I passed could enact old pacts and devotions as they embraced the air between them, would the world be any kinder? I want to see again the man dancing with his scythe in a field of his own sky, lithe and joyous, the hewn grass, the long blade, how it curved around him like a latch to a clasp, a lid to a bowl, a knife to the sacrificial throat. Yet the sky stayed open, the scythe a wing, and the man who lifted it was dancing. Here now, brambles scribble over everything. It's hard to see beyond them, to see the world as more than aftermath, a jumble of unwanted things. Dishwashers, dryers lined up for nowhere, rusted rows of tractors, a single collapsed box lying in a ditch. What are those grassy mounds, rising like barrows in a grubby yard, and a lone horse grazing between them? I don't know what the man crossing his field with wheelbarrow and dog hoped his day would come to when he opened his eyes this morning. Smoke is rising from behind another clotted fence. The story of what's been tossed aside began when no one was looking, or we all looked away, or simply forgot what started the first altercation. A cow, a well, a wheel, the smell of cut wood so dense it made the air shimmer like oil. Now smoke rises from burn piles, heaps of smoke heaping softly. Up over the hills, everything softens. A man once stood in his neighbor's field and stayed there not moving. All morning he watched the sun dissolve frost from everywhere except beneath his body's shadow. And his neighbor, not wanting to interrupt whatever it was, left a heap of turnips at the shadow's feet. But the woman who sits now scraping her shoes, who is she? And the woman standing over her dog who begins to scold her son in a low and vicious voice as soon as we've gone by. Or maybe scolds the dog, or the sky, or her eyes for what they failed to tell her hands for what they wanted to do. Wanting hangs in the air like smoke that can't quite rise. The general store is all but boarded up. A silent raft of crows lifts from devouring rotting apples, small and wormy. They watch, wary, until we've gone. You didn't need to worry, we'd say, if we thought they'd listen. Fleets of leaves scatter the path. We crackle over their dry ribs, their last crisp sounds. Wherever the paved ground buckles, painted lozenges veined like leaves or bony fishes cover the wounds to warn us. Thanks, we'd say, if we knew where to say it. The sky dims into late afternoon, the sun pale under the clouds, a glinting dime like the one I found by the creek where we stopped just before turning back. Silver eye above the rubble of river cobbles. Pick up any rock in a pile. and set it anywhere on purpose. See how it changes? The muted colors, the curves, no longer indistinct but somehow chosen, newly visible, maybe even complete. I think it's about time for me to wrap this up. So maybe I'll close with one last poem. And this poem is a landscape, but one that I experienced only by looking at a photograph. And probably should dedicate this poem to Gary Tepfer, since it was his photograph. It's called Cañón del Muerto. The horses were so small under the yellow light, under the tree. They might have been thoughts I put there, their glossy curves, their shadows. Did they move and then hold still? Or did I fill them with breathing, ears flicking, the tree thought rising from them, a cloud of gold, a swarm of papered wings made for soaking up light. Each leaf precise, but seeming to blur, to mingle with air and dying, the day caught at the edge of abeyance. But the horses, how long will they stay? And is that what we want? Or are we waiting to discover in what manner they leave us? Thunder, eyelash, increments of shade. Thank you.